your mind gains behavior, and a brand that captures your heart gains the commitment. I think this is very well said by Scott Talgo. He's a brand strategist. This is part of our book, which we are talking about. And this is the whole idea and the genesis of the book, which talks about the entire purpose-driven branding. And we also like to mention that India being such an amazing market where we have different, brands coming from MNCs to startups from different sectors, different businesses have catered to that particular orientation of purpose-driven branding. So again, with that thought, I would like to welcome everybody and thank you so much for being with us and being part of this auspicious moment and spending your time today with us on the book launch. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Professor Jain, for your wonderful address. Now it is my immense pleasure to invite President and Director at MICA, Professor Shailendra Raj Mehta, to welcome the audience and share his insights on purpose-driven branding and how it would help academia and industry in the context of the Indian market. I'm sorry, Professor Mehta, your audio seems to be a little broken.
Okay, wait. What I will do then, I'll stop my video and then I will just speak. Hopefully that will help.
Yes, sir, it is clear now.
It is clear. Okay, excellent. So again, my apologies. I'm on the road. There's some emergency travel that I had to take care of, and I have to catch a flight again very shortly. But thrilled to be at this launch of this book, Purpose-Driven Branding by Professor David Aker and Professor Varsha Jain. And it could not have come at a better time, because I think when I was in graduate school many, many moons ago, as an economist, I was taught Milton Friedman's dictum that corporations should only focus on profit. Once the profits are distributed, then the profit owner can decide what social activities they want to engage in, and that's their private business. But now I think the circle has turned completely. And the idea that corporations should only, or entities in general, should only focus on profit to the exclusion of everything else seems very quaint and frankly wrong. And the good news is that in India, we've had a long tradition of social engagement by companies. And the best example of that is the Tata Group, so much so that the generations of the Tata family essentially transferred their shares to several trusts. And I've done personally a lot of work with the Tata Group, and I can tell you that purpose and purpose-driven profit and purpose-driven branding is something that they have done for over 100 years. And it's high time that all of us basically took heed. And I'm sure that this wonderful book that Varsha and David have written, that will show us the way. So without much ado, let me turn the floor back to our wonderful slate of speakers. And I very much look forward to hearing what they have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mehta, for sharing your insights and striking the right note that businesses should go beyond profits. Extremely grateful to hear your voice. Now I request our Dean, MICA, Dr. Geeta Hegde, to share her valuable insights and give away a welcome address to our August gathering.
Thank you. And it's always an honor to be, talking while the legends of marketing are here in the same platform. David Aker and Professor Jagdish Sheth, thank you for this opportunity. And I think I read the book and I found it really, really good, really timely. the best thing I felt was the number of examples that were taken in the book. And it didn't show as if the concept and the context were different and the example was given separately. It just segued into the examples, and that was amazing. Great job done. And I think it is one of the interesting books that I've read. And this is going to be useful for both academia, not only for academia, and it's definitely going to give a lot of models to the industry as well. The signature social programs and branding that you've written about comes across as if it can be, that can be used by the industry also. Professor Mehta mentioned about Tata's way back from 1919. They've been, working on social work, and anybody in India, if you ask them about the company which gives back to the society, the first name that comes is Tata's. And of course, a lot of resonating brands, right from HDFC today being the fourth largest bank in the world because of the work they've done. And interesting examples like Akshaya Patra, Arvind Eye Hospital. I can go on, and there's that amazing work done, Professor Akar and Varsha. I'm proud of you. And I'm glad that MICA has given an opportunity and supported Varsha for a book like this. And this is going to be an interesting book for a long way to come. All the best and congratulations.
Thank you, Professor Hegde, for your warm welcome. Now it is my immense pleasure to request the co-authors, Dr. David Acker and Dr. Varsha Jain, distinguished guest, Dr. Jagdish Sheth, President and Director of MICA, Dr. Shailendra Raj Mehta, although he has some issues with the video, and Dean of MICA, Dr. Geeta Hegde, to launch the book by hoisting their copies up in the air for our audience.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to have this wonderful book launch officially. And it is now my immense pleasure to introduce a distinguished personality present with us, the father of modern mark branding, Professor David Acker. Professor Acker is a vice chairman at Profit, brand strategist, and the author of 100 articles and books. He is recognized authority on branding and has developed several recognizable concepts, including Acker brand vision model. He has received numerous awards for his contributions to the science of marketing. In 2015, he was inducted into American Marketing Association Hall of Fame for his lifetime achievements in marketing. I'm elated to have Professor Acker, the co-author of the book and a distinguished speaker. And I would request, sir, to please introduce the concept of the book. Over to you, Professor Acker.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen. And let's see. Okay, well, thanks so much for arranging this launch party, and thanks to my friend Jag Sheth for coming. He and I go way back. My goal in the next for a long time has been to try to get my ideas across the business and to influence the way they strategize and manage. And I've been really excited about somehow connecting with the Indian business community, and that's been very exciting for me. And so I really thank Varsha for coming on board and adapting this book to the Indian into the Indian marketplace and introducing Indian examples and so on. And I thank Wiley for making it possible, making this book accessible to the Indian business community. One of my activities is blogging, and I've done 400 blogs over the years, some of which have gone viral. And if you look at the data from my blogs, the number 3 and 4 cities in terms of numbers that read my blogs are New York and London. Numbers 1 and 2 are Delhi and Mumbai. So that means that my presence in India is really gotten a lot of traction, and I really appreciate that. I feel a little bit Indian. So with that, let me talk about the book and give you a snapshot of it. First of all, it all starts with the societal challenges that face us. The global warming has created enormous fires, water shortage, and storms. There's inequality all throughout the world. There's unhealthy lifestyles, and there's dozens of other societal problems. And the reality is that government just can't do it all. There's something like 70% of the world's citizens feel that government is not doing enough. And so society needs help from business. They need the resources from business, their people, their advertising budgets, their technology, and their knowledge. The business especially are very good at local knowledge, because that's where a lot of these challenges have to be addressed, and where government is having to take a bigger picture. And business has agility. They really know how to test and learn and to get things done. And the reality is that business have stepped up. Small, medium, and large business have devoted enormous resources into social programs. And that's really encouraging. But government just, anyway, business is doing a good job. And the number one goal of their social effort is to impact a societal challenge. And they're making a big difference. But there's a second goal that is really the difference between sort of hitting a singles or hitting a home run in baseball tolerance. The business brand, if it can be elevated by a social program, gets an energy lift, gets an image lift, gets an engagement lift, because social programs are uniquely able to generate energy, to generate image, to generate engagement, because of their very nature. And this is really important. This business brand lift is really important in situations where the offering is kind of functional. The offering is taken for granted. And sometimes the business has little other ways to generate that brand lift. Now, when you do get that brand lift, what you get is a customer connection. You get employee motivation, and you get the respect of your business partners. And that's really important. Let me just interject a story here. And this is a mythical story, goes back to Sir Christopher Wren, a famous architect of the day that designed St. Paul's Cathedral. He had, in 1695, was reputed to have been walking down the street and asking a worker, "What do you do?" And one said, "I lay bricks." And then he asked a second worker, who said, "He's building a wall, and isn't this a fine wall? I'm very proud of it." And then he asked a third worker, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm building a cathedral." Well, people really want to be associated with organizations that are building cathedrals, not just laying bricks or building a wall. And so that comes to the idea that a business purpose, which is usually growing sales and profit, but it can be also very ennobling things like building insanely great products. That's famously Steve Jobs' business purpose. But these customers, these employees, they want something more. They want to build cathedrals, and that means they need a social purpose. It can be this one and the same with a business purpose, but it might have to be a second one. But a social purpose is a purpose that addresses societal challenges, and is more inspiring. Now, for a social purpose to really be effective at helping a business and building a business brand, it's got to do two things. It's got to connect. That means it's got to touch people, and it's got to communicate. It's got to break through the information overload and the media clutter that we face today. And that's the road. And what have we got in the field right now? These companies that are doing so much, so many resources to help social challenges, what are they doing? If you look at the profile of almost all companies, it's really staggering, quite amazing. They consist of grants. They will give grants to local people that are doing good, to national people that are doing good, but it's a lot of it goes into grants. Then they have volunteer programs where their employees spend 2 days a year maybe doing some good work by finding a social program. And they have energy goals. They have CO2 emissions or energy use. And sometimes they have resource conservation goals. And they have ESG scores. And ESG scores have hundreds of dimensions and all kinds of metrics, like the percent of minorities on boards or something. And all this it looks and feels ad hoc. It feels confusing. It's diffuse. It's not focused. And most of all, it doesn't inspire and it doesn't communicate. It's almost impossible for this. And it all looks the same. It just reeks of sameness. So what's needed are signature social programs that represent the social purpose. It's their signature. And it represents real societal needs. So it touches and inspires. It's credible, which means it's impactful and it has a long-term commitment. It's not just there for a season or a year or 2 or 3 years. It's there for decades. And it's branded. And the brand is key to connecting and communicating. Because you just think what a brand does. It represents shared values. So if a customer or employee is interested in addressing climate change, it'll recognize that this brand is working side by side with them. They share those values, and it represents in totality a vehicle to inspire. So you're inspired by the brand. You're not inspired by a volunteer program. You're inspired by a brand, and it communicates. I mean, that's what brands do. They communicate. It's a vehicle to store information. It's a vehicle to organize information. It's a vehicle to signal what to process. So you get new information in. The brand kind of tells you, is this something that will add value to my store of information? Will it fit into the way I've organized it? That's what brands do. They communicate. So let me talk 3 specific examples of brands. One is Barclays, the bank. In 2009, when there was a financial meltdown, Barclays got a lot of the blame. They were accused or perceived of being involved in the LIBOR scandal, where the interest rates were manipulated, and fairly or unfairly, they got a lot of blame. And in about 2012, they were the least trusted brand in the least trusted industry in the UK. Banking, trust is important. And they were in a hole. And so in 2013, they developed a social purpose. They said, we got to start over. And we're now going to be involved in helping people achieve their ambition in the right way. And in fact, that was their business purpose and social purpose. And so they asked their employees to develop their own programs and groups of employees that would fulfill this social purpose. And 40 programs were developed. And among the most important programs, they focused on them and used them to develop stories. And one of them was called the Digital Eagles. And it was to teach public how to thrive in a digital world. Started with 12 employees. There are now 17,000 involved in this program. It did things like teach kids coding and safety. They had online courses. They had a Tea and Teach program where they would bring in people that needed help in this direction to their facilities, and they would give them tea and teach them how to handle the iPhone and so on. And they made house calls. And then they developed stories among these things. And anyway, one of them was about Steve Rich, and he was an enthusiastic soccer player or football player in his terms. And he was really into football. It was a big part of his life. And then he got injured and he couldn't play anymore. But he could play walking soccer or football. No running, no contact, 6 per side. And he needed a website, and he got the help of the Digital Eagles. And they came in, they helped him, developed a website to raise interest, and they helped him develop keywords, and they helped him connect people with teams. They helped him provide information to his audience on schedules. He arranged tournaments, even a national tournament, and then they created a story about the Digital Eagles. And this 3-minute video, you got to know Steve Rich. You got to know his wife. You got to know his grandson. You got to know his mates. You got to know how important this walking football was to him and how it really rejuvenated his life. It was an inspirational story. It made you cry. And this story and others from 2014 to 16, trust went up 33%. 5 times what they were getting before. Consideration up 130%. And by 2015, the positive press mentions were 5,000, where there was only negative before. One more, a Lifebuoy, a bar soap that in India was, as elsewhere, were using bar soap to combat germs and disease. And they had all kinds of hand washing programs that were a little bit dormant. They weren't thriving. And so in 2013, they reassessed and they really buttressed their programs. They really professionalized them, made them better, especially their programs into schools. And they attached a brand name to it, Help a Child Reach 5. And they decided to focus on the people affected and not just describe the program. They instead told stories about the people. And one story is about Utari and how she nurtured the tree of life that was planted when her little boy was born. Her child died of dysentery caused by a water thing and could have been prevented with better hand washing. And so she was so, as a symbol for the hand washing program and for a symbol for her boy, we see her nurturing the tree, and we see her celebrating what would have been her child's 5th year birthday. So emotional. So you can't watch that with that film without being involved. And this was one of 3 such films made, and they cumulatively got 33 million views. And they did so much for the Lifebuoy Help Your Child Reach 5 program. Well, one final example is Thrivent, a Fortune 500 financial services company that was started to help church congregations manage their money better. And they have their slogan, Live Generously, and that they put forth. And their purpose, humanity thrives when people make the most of all they are given. And Thrivent in in 2005, that's almost 20 years ago, adopted as their signature program Habitat for Humanity. And last year, Habitat built or rebuilt 7 million homes, over 100,000 volunteers in 17 countries. And you think about what Thrivent gets from Habitat. First of all, visibility. Thrivent has 2 million customers and tens of thousands of employees. These are all organized into brand communities, organized by zip code. So there's hundreds of brand communities that are formed to do good work. And most of their efforts are devoting to support Habitat for Humanity. And the personal connection they get from this relationship is really intense. There was a program to ask children to explain what the home means to their family. They have shared values with this community, and they support the value of live generously, this Habitat. And there's engagement opportunities. The Habitat community, I mean, the Thrivent community had 6.2 million hours of volunteering. They and a lot of that involved on Habitat Ventures in Africa to build homes. They raised almost $300 million in money through the Thrivent Builds brand, a Thrivent brand that's devoted to Habitat. And there's also umbrella social brands that represent the total effort of a organization. So Starbucks have global social impact. Danone has One Planet, One Health. IKEA has people and plant positive. Pepsi Plus, which is the umbrella brand for the PepsiCo work. Planet plus people. So you notice something in this introduction of the idea of a branded social program that's a signature to the organization. When the business brand is enhanced, it generates better financial performance because they get the energy lift, the image lift, the engagement lift. And that creates support for the social effort. It gives them resources. So Thrivent gives Habitat resources, gives them people, volunteering, money, and it gives them an endorsement. So Habitat by picking out, or Thrivent by picking out Habitat, tells the world that we could support a lot of social programs. We picked Habitat. So that gives people reassurance that Habitat is effective, that is worth supporting, because Thrivent put a lot of effort to deciding who to endorse, and they endorsed Habitat. So what we have here is what I call a circle of influence, a win-win. You have a branded social signature program, gives an energy, image, and engagement lift to a business, enhances the business brand, and that in turn flows resources and endorsement back to the social program. So it's a circle that keeps building, keeps circulating, and that generates the win-win. So anyway, that's all in the book, The Future of Purpose-Driven Branding, and I'm so excited that Wiley and under the guidance of Barsha Chin and our co-author, that has created a book that is tailored for the Indian management community.
Thank you so much, Professor Aker, for your sharing your insights and for introducing the concept of the book. Now it is my honor to introduce Professor Jagdish Sheth, a renowned scholar and a global thought leader. He has been awarded the Padma Bhushan Award, which is India's highest civilian award for non-residential Indians, NRI, for literature and education. He has published more than 300 research papers and 30 books across various disciplines and is presently a Charles H. Kelstad Professor of Business at Emory University, Gazeta Business School. He received an honorary doctorate from the University of Illinois and consulted various organizations. And I am honored to have you, Professor Sheth, for today's event. I request you to share your valuable insights by reiterating the ideas mentioned by Professor Aker with a specific focus on emerging markets and India.
Thank you so much. And thanks, David and Varsha. It's very well written book, first of all, very timely. I read it and I could not put it down. The storytelling that David advocates strongly is already manifested in the book. And the stories are incredible. Companies chosen are very good. So that's really strong endorsement about what David's presentation itself is all about, why business needs to align with a social cause, a signature cause especially. And fortunately, we do have signature causes, not just for the emerging markets, but for all markets, which is now more and more United Nations 17 sustainable goals. For example, climate change or global warming is not limited to emerging economies, but it is equally important in the US, for example. We are suffering from that, of what's happening in Hawaii, for example, what happened in Canada, etc. So I think the value of the book is across all markets, not just the Indian market. I'll focus on the Indian market later on. If you look at the history of capitalism in the way Adam Smith talked about, it was all about ownership managing the company or the operations. In fact, from the beginning, business has always been more than business. It got separated from primarily shareholder-driven more recently when companies began to corporatize, where institutional investors were allowed to come in and they demanded a return on their investment, such as the pension plan companies, for example, or private equity companies investing, basically capital markets driving it. So I'll give you some background. Since the Industrial Revolution, primarily in Germany and England, most of the entrepreneurs really went deep where the resources were, which were like rivers, mining in remote parts of the world. They created townships, and it was their obligation to take care of everybody in that township. The family became very wealthy, but they lived there. There will be just one school where their managers' children also go. There is only one church. And even though you are wealthy, you attend the church every Sunday, just like anybody else. Being wealthy family or founders of the towns, you are respected, so you got the front seat, but you are told every week that there is something above you called God. They were always community-oriented. So they got the resources from the community, whether that's a water resource, etc. So I did a historical analysis of the German cities where industrial revolutions took place and how they're still very heavily dominated by these owner-managed businesses. Same thing is true in England. Last one of the big cities you can hear is Coventry, but that was true of all the places where the natural resources were not in cities, they were actually in small towns. I came to know about this a little more when I started working for Whirlpool Corporation, an appliance maker, one of the largest in the world. Whirlpool is located in a small town called Benton Harbor, Michigan. St. Joseph, technically, nearby. Everybody knows everybody. Your suppliers came because you wanted them to come, so you nurture your suppliers. You engage in the community. You are employee-centric because they live next door to you. Their children, your children, or their children, their grandchildren and your children may be involved. So they do community activity together. This continues in America by Kohler, another company, Caterpillar, which is still in a small town. I can give you about a dozen major companies who never moved their headquarters from small towns, and the family lived there. SC Johnson is well known for the same thing. Unfortunately, for the next generation of family members, in search of capital for expansion, began to relocate the corporation into where the capital markets were, which would be big cities. let's say New York, London, Tokyo the same way, Asia, for example, or second tier capital markets would be like Atlanta, could be whatever they are. So they got away from the community feel every day in, day out, which is where they only need to see one stakeholder, which is the shareholder or investor. They don't think about the employees because employees are all over the world, actually, technically. Let's say IT service companies from India. They're global now, basically. So you don't see them as much. They don't see suppliers because they're distributed all over. So the concentration of one location, physical by time and space, has gone away. And they are now driven by only one stakeholder as opposed to 5 stakeholders. I think that is the key divorce between family-run businesses and corporatized businesses. Unfortunately, this was exacerbated in the 70s when with the oil embargo, many listed companies and stock market collapsed. The debt went high, very high. So, and then the stock market price came down. So the leverage was basically a liability. The debt to equity ratio became more than 1-to-1, maybe 4 or 5, as it has happened recently in India, where you over-leverage the market. And in the process, private equity took over, whose whole job was to create shareholder value because private equity is driven by their customers who are all investors. They're looking for a return. So I think which has been a key detour. Now for the first time, that is coming back to haunt them. If you see militancy against governments, which we see right now all over the world, populism is very common. Incumbent presidents, prime ministers are thrown out. Incumbent parties are thrown out. And all of a sudden you see totally unknown people becoming new leaders of the nation, as it happened in Chile or in Peru or in Ukraine. The current president was just a comedian, but people are fed up with existing leaders in political process. But more importantly, you see violence like we did in January 6th, attacking the Capitol. My worry is that unless the corporations wake up, that they have to contribute back to the society in a significant way, there will be a raid on the corporate campuses. They're more vulnerable than government buildings. There's nothing you can do to stop a mob. To me, that's very important. People are angry that companies are making money, individual investors are making money, and the society, we have a degradation like gun violence in America or drug abuse, for example, etc. So to me, combining both interests are very important. Role of social programs is not just limited to the government, as people expect. It's not limited to NGOs or civil society, but it is an integral part of the business. Now let's come to the emerging economies. 60% of all consumption in India today of products is unbranded products. Used to be 70-80% till the 1991 reforms, where private sector was allowed to do a lot more than the government sector. About 90% of the product distribution, maybe about 80% now, still goes through unorganized retailing. Economy is still a cash economy. Branding becomes very important. Today's middle class in India, especially the younger generation, demands branded flour, branded lentil, branded rice. They don't accept the old one because historically brands did one thing very right, which was to provide quality assurance. Whether those are in consumer products or those were in appliances or those were in fact, let's say automobiles. Henry Ford became very popular. It sold very well because he provided quality built into the product. Brands evolved from quality to social affiliation. Which socioeconomic class you belong to, brands provided identity, conspicuous consumption, what we saw. Today, brands are getting into providing meaning from consumption, not just from the customer side, but company brand for all of the stakeholders. A brand reputation becomes very important, as David mentioned. The purpose-driven branding is absolutely more critical in emerging economies because the disparity is so large. You see abject poverty right outside almost a multi-million-dollar high-rise condominiums or apartments or houses that we see. The proximity of abject poverty and affluence is striking. Usually by zoning laws in advanced countries, you don't see the poverty, it is hidden in ghetto areas. Whereas if you come to India, that's the first thing that strikes you, that people are sleeping on the street. They're homeless essentially, although they're not. Which means that the business cannot sustain itself unless it gets engaged into social programs. And David make a very good point. It is not anymore the government. It is no longer, in fact, the civil societies, but the companies will have to take this responsibility. And I will tell you, it works. Ras Sisodia and myself, along with David Wolf, we wrote a book on this published in 2007, I think, called The Forms of Endearment, like the Terms of Endearment movie. Through asking people, we identified, people submitted about 200 companies who are very good in one stakeholder, like very employee-oriented, very supplier-oriented, very community-oriented. And through nominations and processes, we reduced it down to about 60 companies, out of which we reduced it down further. Those are non-listed companies. And those companies which are in basically private hands. Ultimately, we found 20 companies which are listed in the stock market, so we could do the tracking about financial performance. And for example, Costco for employees, not Walmart at that time, although Walmart has changed now. Toyota came out, Patagonia came out, old companies, new companies, Tata came out of course. Ours was mostly the American sample. These 19 companies that we analyzed over time from 1995 till now has generated average 40% annual return. 40% annual return. We compare that with Good to Great book, which is a benchmark because Jim Collins actually took companies that created earnings return bigger and bigger and identified why these companies make so much money and came out with several concepts. So that is a good benchmark for shareholder-driven companies. Their average is about 20%, roughly half. And then if you take the benchmark, which is S&P 500, of 500 top companies, it is only about 9.5%, 4 times. Jim Collins, 11 companies, 2 have already declared Chapter 11 protection, which means they're bankrupt. The 19 companies we selected for public analysis have gone on. So I find that companies which are located in small towns makes difference. Now come to the Indian context. Tata was not in Mumbai or even in Calcutta. They were in Jamshedpur. Think about that. That was a small little town. Like Kohler, which is a toilet manufacturing sanitation products company, is actually a town called Kohler, created by them in Wisconsin. Jamshedpur is similarly created by Tata because the raw materials were there, coal and iron ore, to make a steel, for example. Tata also has a subsidiary for Tata Tea, again located in a small town. You still go, when you go to Jamshedpur, you feel like it's not a Bombay-driven company. That's very important to understand. That's the roots of Jamshedji Tata. That was true of Birla Group at one time. Hindalco was located in a small town where you had to build a whole school system, colony as they call it, like a military do, where your workers will have a place to stay. And that is true in Japan, that is true in China even, surprisingly, that is true in all parts of the world. So this belief system that you have to serve the society, take care of your workers, take care of your suppliers, is built into that one. Now in the Indian context, David, you may not know, but till the 1991 reforms, more than 50% of the GDP came from public sector enterprises, PSU as we call it, or what the rest of the world will call as state enterprises. All state enterprises, whether those are gas authority, or Steel Authority, SAIL, GAIL, or those are life insurance, LIC, for example. Doesn't matter, the bank SBI, all had a built-in obligation in their charter that 2% of their net profit will go toward employee development. Because they were state enterprises, government owned them, the government created their social programs built into the charter. Which is why, when we made the corporate reforms recently, we put a 2% tax on private sector to make sure private sector does not become an advantageous against the public sector enterprises when you open up the market, whether it's in a cell phone area, whatever it is. So we have a 2% tax on everybody to equalize the public sector. Public sector share has been coming down to maybe about 40-45%, but still it is the crown jewel in India. We don't study public sectors very well. We don't talk about their stories, which is very fascinating. In fact, for the first time, this government is using public sector and public infrastructure to create like Aadhaar, for example, or UPI, which is very fascinating, or SBI creating a holding company, etc. So we need to study public sectors and their social purpose, which was built into this charter. The latest estimate I have in India is that with CSR tax that is built in, it's about $5 billion. So when you talk to people who engage in CSR, large corporations have their own agenda. They probably have, for example, universities they also. You have Azim Premji University, you have the Reliance University, GR, whatever they call it. Everybody has a university, which is fine. But if you talk to family-owned businesses in India, which is very large, they have very specific social purposes. And we need to study them also at the same time. But overall, I will conclude by saying one has to go into sustainable development goals of the United Nations, mapping that against what you can do. But it is inevitable that you must have a purpose-driven branding, where the social cause you pick up is identifying with you. It creates, as David talked about, a customer lift, an employee lift, and an engagement lift, pretty much. So I'm very much supportive of this book. And Varsha, congratulations for making an Indian case study, Indian studies. And David, of course, you are a master storyteller. This is not your first book. You and I know each other for 50 years now, way back when. So again, congratulations. Very good book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sheth, for sharing your insights and building the entire background of telling us to know that how this actually concept got evolved. And it's not primarily about India, but it's about the entire world that we have to discuss about. And we are happy that you liked the book. So thank you so much for that as well. Now, with those insights which you spoke about, it's not about the MNCs, but also about the family-run businesses. It's about contributing back to the society and also about the emerging markets, which are also deeply connected. And you mentioned a very important point that it's about, the startups as well that has to take care, which should be the ingrained part of the business models, I think. So with that, I would request Professor Ekar to do some reflections and share his views about what Professor Sheth has discussed with us so that we can have more engaging conversations around his thought processes, and our audience and we all can learn from your insights and thought process. Professor Ekar.
Well, I first of all think that the Firms of Endearment was a really important book, and it came out 20 years ago now, but it's been revised since then. But it was really an early book, certainly, that put forth this idea that capitalism needs to have a different perspective and different set of objectives. Very important book, and it was really a book, as Jag outlined, based on some very logical and persuasive reasoning that you you start with a group of companies, then you reduce them to some that you have pretty confident are performing well on that score. I was really interested in Jag's comment that there's a correlation between a company that's centered in a small town and their proclivity to have a social purpose and to do things. That's really a provocative idea, and you need some names and like Kohler and so on, and there's a lot of face validity in that. And then you think about, why is that the case? And then you have the social element of small town that Jag mentioned, but yeah, it's a lot of characteristics of the small town that we lose in this urbanization. And so I think that there's an advantage to that. So the question is, how can we create that small town spirit and values and habits in a large organization? And I mentioned Thrivent and what they've done. And of course, they kind of come out of a small town feeling in Minnesota, but what they've done is created these brand communities organized by zip code. So you have sets of employees that have a lot of, get to join a little local organization that has some of the characteristics of a small town that Jag was mentioned. And so anyway, that was really stimulating for me. And I really value Jag's mentorship and leadership and friendship over the years.
David, I just wanted to comment, in your revision of this book, you may want to write a story about Pella, which is a window maker, about a $2 billion company, still family owned. And you will see them in every place where they manufacture a window, which are maybe 20, 30 factories. They have this community belief. In fact, they've invested so much of creating fine arts, like a theater, not just a movie house, so that they get talented people to come and live in rural India or a small town India and a small town America. I find fascinating that company like GE really began in Schenectady, way out in a small town. That's where General Electric. But once they moved to Lexington Avenue, and I used to be their advisor there in the New York City, they again saw only one shareholder, one stakeholder, which was it. And of course, as you said, Jack did a fantastic job of Neutron Jack, as people called him. That was a beautiful write-up in your book about how GE destroyed itself in the process by becoming obsessed about shareholder value. And I think the executive compensation linked to shareholder value is a nightmare. I remember my conversation with Tom Murphy, who was the chairman of General Motors, the largest corporation. His salary was going to be, including bonus, no more than $800,000 annually, and his retirement would be accordingly. And he was an accountant from University of Illinois, which is how I met him. And he said, I'm shocked that the founder of Federal Express is getting a $6 million as a CEO compensation. Was followed immediately by Disney, whoever was the person who joined there, I forget the name, like $12 million. The executive compensation skyrocketed. And ultimately, that was anchored to our shareholder value only, which is why they primarily became self-interest matched with the corporate interest toward one stakeholder. Executive compensation was not about what are you doing for community service, what are you doing for your employees, what are you doing for your suppliers. My view is that, and I wrote the chapter on supplier side because I believe the largest value created for a corporation is by your suppliers. Let me give an example. In the PC business today, the value add done in the factory by Lenovo, IBM, HP, Dell is only about 11%. That includes labor, about 4%, cost of capital, weighted average is about 4%, and management overhead is about 2% only. 89% is all procurement. Procurement is the most corrupt department I've found in most corporations. And out of the 89% procurement at one time, 79% went to two companies only, Microsoft for the software and Intel for the chips. They're laughing all the way to the bank, whereas you have a margin problem. See that? So IBM quit ultimately ThinkPad and sold it to Lenovo because they couldn't sustain it. This is true in appliance manufacturing, I'm finding it, which is why GE decided to quit the appliance business, gave it to Haier, which is a Chinese company, for example. It's fascinating. So value add is created by our suppliers, which only retailers know very well, but the manufacturers don't, which is another very key thing. So I'm very passionate about making, in fact, I have a manuscript called How to Become a World-Class Customer. Everybody wants to be a world-class marketer. But the procurement department is really very bad in many ways. So what do you do to focus on that, which is interesting. But again, you remember your roots come from a very small town. Your grandparents when they landed, remember that, okay?
Yes.
It's very, you told me the story. Those are the values that we need to recreate in an urban setting. And Armonk was the headquarters for IBM. Once they moved to New York, they became shareholder driven. UPS was a private company, only owned by employees. Founders wanted it till one of the CEOs, in order to compete against Federal Express, wanted capital to invest into Europe, primarily Western Europe, essentially, which was getting deregulated. So he went stock market, 10%. Today, that 10% equity outside is driving UPS more than 90, or it's less than 90 now, but majority is still owned by employees. But employees don't drive it. In fact, there's a major strike situation. That's unthinkable at UPS at one time. So again, this multi-stakeholder approach for shared value is very key.
Thank you so much, Professor Sheth, for sharing your insights and, emphasizing on the core values and the value system, which you always tell us that, the values are something which cannot be taught at anywhere in the world. It is ingrained in the person and the way the person grow up, and then the stimulus for which the person has been exposed to. So thank you for reiterating all these ideas. Now, I would like to mention a few aspects of the book and tell you that how Indian brands, which are MNCs, as well as, a few startups which we have included in the book, which again goes with the core concept of purpose-driven branding, has actually helped us, and it is going to help the academia as well as industry to take this idea forward. So primarily, as Professor Akar and Professor Sheth has mentioned, the whole idea is about working on different challenges that the society is facing and how brands can develop those programs which are very inclusive in nature. It talks about the stakeholders upliftment. It talks about inclusivity and how agile it is. And I would say during COVID, we all have become very agile. Similarly, it talks about the businesses have to be pretty agile. Now, coming to the examples, I think I'll start with the one that David was talking about, which is about a Lifebuoy. And just to give you a heads up on the numbers that we have also listed in the book, that with that initiative of washing the hands and adapting the villages in India, which they have done, and they have actually saved a lot of kids who had diarrhea. And the good news is the death of these people actually fell by 75%, which is like a commendable achievement, not only in terms of business, but helping the society, identifying those spots. I think a few of my students are here, and I will always tell them that branding is not about just bragging about yourself and your company. Branding is all about going to the deeper penetration of the society, the roots, identifying the issues, and then building on it. So I think that is the whole idea with which Lifebuoy has worked. Again, I think Dr. Mehta mentioned about Tata Trust, and we mentioned that as well in the book, which is where Tata ingrained of the business is about purpose-driven branding, and they have a lot of initiatives which we have mentioned. They do it in the life setting, which is about the hospitals which they have, which is the Tata Memorial Cancer Hospital, where they actually help the patients They have NACO, which is the National AIDS Control Organization, where they help financially, and it's not about the superficial business which they are doing. Tata itself as a brand resembles credibility and trust. And that is, I think, what David was talking about in terms of the branding, which we do, umbrella branding. It goes with that, with all that, master brands that Tata have in India and outside as well. Besides that, there are other brands such as, Nestle, where they talk about the Nanni Kali, which is, the girl education for the underprivileged girls. This is amazing because, again, going back to David's idea about how do I help the society and brand it, and going back to Professor Shadwari, always talk about, what are the emerging generation doing? What are you doing for them who will be the future of any country? So Nestle did a very good work in terms of identifying those spots. And then now the whole idea is they have 1 lakh beneficiaries over 20 years, which is again giving back to the society and helping girl education, which is the backbone of any society. Besides that, I think with the same orientation of women orientation and the empowerment, Dove did an amazing work, which we have included in our book, which talks about beauty is not about what you present in the physical attributes. Beauty is all about what you are and what you present. And with that idea, the whole brand by 2025, they want to change the idea of stereotyping in India as well. And by 2025, the 8 million young people have to break their stereotypes and empower women, where the whole idea is beauty is a source of confidence. It's not an anxiety. This is the whole idea with which Dove is working in the world as well as in India, because beauty is something which connotates with the person. The person has to believe, and the women have to believe in themselves that they are beautiful, which is where the whole programs are being branded and social spots are being created where the women should feel empowered about themselves. Now, that was about something which I was talking about, the big brands, but also the startups. For example, we included the live case studies and real-time examples from Niman Shoes. And interestingly, what they do is, this is a startup in India, and they talk about the premium shoes, and the whole differentiation is all about, they develop the formal shoes as well as the sports shoes from the plastic bottles. Now, that is something which all the entire business organizations have to work upon, where they have to understand that the ingredients which they are using, how sustainable they are. I think Professor Shet mentioned about sustainability, and sustainability is something which is driven in the business. That's how you become purpose-driven brand. So that is the whole idea. And now with the last example, and there are a bunch of examples, I'm sure that once you refer the book, you would understand the core concept and the examples which we have brought in from different sectors, from different industries from India. But one example which I really want to mention, and it touched my heart, was about Tata Tea. Now, what they have done is they have collaborated with the artisans. And that is where the Rare Planet, which is the startup again, they've collaborated with them. And the whole idea is the local artisan who are actually doing the hand painting, okay? They're using their cooler, which is a cup, which is being used by Tata Tea, and they are promoting the paintings which comes from the state like Bihar, like Madhubani, the paintings that come from Maharashtra, western part of India, which is Worli. And they are actually working on 26 designs which come from different parts of India and bringing them together, empowering this artisan, and then scaling the brand further. I think that is something which is what Professor Ekar as Professor Shet are talking about. And that's what is happening already in India. Now, what we need to do is we need to scale that up further. We need to brand that further. And it's not only about doing work, but it's all about, how do you brand that work properly, how you identify those spots and try to provide the solutions to the societal problem as a brand when you want to grow with the community as well as the society. So I think this is what we all have mentioned in the book, and we would like to scale this up further. And thank you, Professor Shet, to mention about the Kala. Definitely will keep that in mind for the next edition. And this is going to be, again, a game changer in terms of the orientation of businesses, orientation of organization that we have in India and in emerging markets. So with that, I think I will go back to the Q&A part of it, where we have a lot of questions that people have asked about, and then we will try to address them one by one. So over to you, Bharat.
Thank you, Professor Jain. Thank you, Professor Chit and Professor Devdakar. It was such a great and engaging discussion. We have received a lot of great insights. So from the audience section, there are some questions. I'll go one by one. We have very few minutes left, so we'll just take 3 questions. Number 1, the audience wants to understand, what do you think the future of such social initiatives and how it will help to accumulate a higher brand equity? Professor Aker.
Social initiatives. Well, I think there's a challenge to get people to understand branding and the importance of putting a brand name on it, and that's especially true, I might add, in the environmental area of social programs. That people will have an energy goal, they'll have an emissions goal, an energy use goal, perhaps a resource conservation goal, but nothing is branded. And the result is that there's usually a huge number of programs, like we'll change the kind of light bulb in our factories and so forth, and we will make the routes of our trucks more efficient so they use less energy. But there's nothing branded. There's nothing to and say, people say, well, what are you doing about energy? Well, we're changing light bulbs and we're changing our truck routes. Well, there's no branded program. There's no way to communicate that. There's no way to communicate the passion and so forth. And so I think it's not so easy to get people to understand branding and to structure things so that branding works. You don't want to brand something that's not worth branding. And the second problem is that it's hard to find a signature program. It is really hard. I was in the board of an insurance company for 12 years, and I told them every year, we've got to find a signature program. And they said, yeah, we sure do, but we can't. And we will continue to do grants. That will be our social program. And so it's not easy. So it requires and we talk in the book about how you do that, how you maybe inventory what you're now doing and seeing if there's something there to scale, that's something that's worthwhile, something that has a spark of interest, at least in a small group, and see if that can be nurtured. And then to look at the social problems around you to see if anything your resources can add, provide a value add. So what we're talking about turns out is not easy to implement. It's not easy to find social programs. It's not easy or natural to use a brand-driven strategy there. And Jay, you should jump in anytime you have something to add.
I do agree that it's hard to find a signature program, and the way to do it may not be as much traditional research, but more the government policy and maybe NGOs. NGOs are in tune because they're not profit-driven, they're mission-driven. And if there is an NGO that is becoming so popular, which means ultimate beneficiary accepts the NGO and its governance, leadership, grant giving, whatever they do, that might be a way to identify signature programs.
Yeah, that's why the Thriven example of adopting Habitat is so useful, because if you Thriven try to find its own program, it's very difficult. But here you've got a Habitat already got an established brand, already got an established proven method, and so now you adopt that and add value at the same time.
Yeah, exactly, and that's happening in India with Akshay Patra, Ekal Vidyalaya. These are all in the education field, serving the underserved populations. And I think aligning with, but not giving grant money. In my view, is that it is a partnership between the NGO, the government, and the business. Business has that kind of a clout, at least, to do it. And the three-way partnership, public-private partnership, is very key, because you need to have your executives work in that NGO environment, feel, see, touch whatever the issues are. Because we have, as you mentioned, business has resources, business has know-how, business has agility. They can think in a way that the NGO can benefit to serve the ultimate population. So having a partnership is very key also, which is what I sit on the advisory board of several NGOs, some of them related to India. And we find fascinating, they're actually working with the state governments in education, because they have the scale. There's one NGO, which is the Delhi Public Schools, and this particular NGO organization, we just finally negotiated with them, and we will have access to maybe 20, 30,000 schools, all serving working class or below working class people even. The public schools are usually meant for that. So I think there's a possibility of identifying signature program from the NGO side, as Thrivent has done. Right? I know about Habitat for Humanity a little more, because it's headquartered in Atlanta, as you know.
Yes, it is.
And by CARE is another headquartered here. CARE gives out grant money. They just gave out $8 or $9 million on water conservation in emerging economies, especially in Africa and to some extent in India. So I think there are signature programs that they've identified that we can relate to. Sorry to belabor the point.
Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful views on this question. There's a very interesting question. We talked all about positive sides of purpose-driven branding. The question is, what if such purpose-driven branding strategies face backlash from the markets due to the mistakes by the brands, or it is a wrong portrayal on the social media? The question to Professor Jain.
Thank you, Parth. And I would build up, and then probably Professor Rick and Professor Shet can add their views as well. It's very nice to talk about branding and social programs, which we have on social media. But as we always talk about, technology is dual swords, and that's why we're always smiling, because we get a lot of backslash from different type of people, because the interpretations are different, and maybe a brand wanted to say something which was not understood the way it should be. So the first thing which I always mention, and we have mentioned in the books as well, that is that first aspect of the brand is they need to acknowledge that, yes, this is something which is wrong has happened, apologize on whatever has happened, because remember, brands are also being managed by human, right? And we all commit mistakes. So the first is acknowledge that, apologize, and then accept it, and then probably take that differently in a channel or personally with that person or organization on the side, and try to understand what exactly the problem is. And then probably after that, you need to understand that how this problem got emerged, got the root cause of it, and then probably that can be flipped to a brand advocacy as well, if you do it right. For example, KFC also had a similar problem in London when they ran out of chicken, and then they did the same process where they apologized to the entire audience. They entirely developed the campaign within few hours, and they went online, and then they spoke about that. And finally, when the consumers and the users understood that, yes, this was a problem and they understood the core issue, after that, all the people who were actually writing bad about the brand, they started becoming the brand advocates of the brand, where they said, okay, KFC, apologies accepted, and then they move ahead with the kind of connotations which they have. So the whole idea, and this we have seen in India as well, that in Cadbury, Maggie, there were so many issues which were there with the brand, but they accepted it, and in all the campaigns they mentioned that, okay, these were the issues which they have addressed in packaging or in their product or ingredients. So that is also core aspect of branding. It's all about purpose-driven branding, where you need to understand if your brand is not doing well and why it is not doing well. And if it is affecting the society, go back to them, hear them out, and then rework on it. It's not about I am the best and I'm selling the best products. No, it's always scope for improvement, and people empowerment is very important when you're dealing such a big brands on social media. So Professor Ricker, you may add more to it. And then
that is the approach that's sort of tried and true. The Tylenol case is as a classic example, but very often that doesn't work. I mean, it just not good enough. Like Walmart, for example, we got all this criticizing by treating their suppliers and their employees like terribly, and they got article after article, and they were pounded in the head, and they would say, "Oh no, we don't do that. Well, we just gave the employees a raise. We gave the highest employee thing. We sent them to college." And we are friends of our suppliers. Nobody listened. Nobody believed. And it made it worse, because they called attention to the fact there was an issue with employees and suppliers. It made it worse. So what I advocate is that of course you have to do what Varsha said, but the emphasis. But in many cases that won't work. In Barclays, it didn't work. They did the same thing. They said, we didn't cause that meltdown. It wasn't us. And we are, besides, we changed our methods and we're not doing that anymore. And it didn't work. And so what does work is to change the conversation. There's George Lakoff, a linguist at Berkeley, wrote a book about, is there an elephant in the room, who talks about, it's not what you are, it's not winning the argument. It's what the argument is about. So if you're Walmart, you get people, in about 7 years ago, they got religion about climate change. And they did enormous programs for climate change. I mean, it's amazing. They made a tangible distance, meaningful distance to international climate change just because of what Walmart did, because they're so big. And there was an article that came out that said it's hard to hate Walmart anymore because of all this good stuff they're doing. And that accomplished what they couldn't accomplish by directly arguing that they're not such bad guys. Same with Barclays. They changed the conversation to these stories about the digital eagles and a couple of other programs like that. And so all of a sudden their trust goes up, their consideration goes up. They got positive mentions in press. So what they did was in neither case could they eliminate the old conversation, but they provide an alternative conversation. They changed the argument. They changed what was being discussed. And so, and that's the beauty of social programs. It can do that. I mean, it did it for Walmart. It did it for Barclays, and they were in a hole. Both of them were in a terrible situation, and they were both arguing that okay, you shouldn't be so mad at us. We're not that bad. We've changed our policies. We give our employees these great things. It just didn't work. Didn't get attention. It wasn't credible. It was voiced with, if not skepticism, cynicism. And so anyway, that's another angle.
Sure. Thank you,
Yeah.
Professor Ecker, for adding this and providing us newer perspective to talk about. Besides what I was talking about, you said that change the conversation. I think that is something which is very important and key when you are into that situation. I would request now Professor Sheth if he has few views to share about how to deal with that situation.
Sure, so we get more questions.
What?
Okay.
Because we'll be repeating the same, so other questions which are waiting to be answered.
Sure, no
Sure.
problem. Yeah.
So, with respect to time, we'll take the last question, and I'll roll this question to all three of you with different perspectives. The question is how purpose-driven branding would help the Indian market. Professor Sheth, if you can talk about education side of it, Professor Varsha Jain on stakeholder side of it, and Professor David Acker on customer side of it. Over to you, Professor Sheth.
I think the old saying, doing well by doing good, is very key. And in education, it's even more so. Education is not about getting a certificate or a degree, but it's a life transforming. My view about education is that as an institution, its purpose is to unlock the potential of students or other stakeholders, including faculty and staff at the same time. And how do you make ordinary person extraordinary? I've always said that if you take a grain of wheat and make it into a loaf of bread, agricultural commodity, the value add is only 3 times. If you take an industrial commodity like rough diamond, a good diamond cutter will polish, shape, and it will come out the brilliance whose value will be 15 to 20 times. But if you take a human being, especially underprivileged, mentor, educate, invest in them, value add is infinite. And in the Indian context, that is the biggest challenge and an opportunity. With 1.4 billion people, we have so many of these people who don't have the opportunity. The size is just enormous. And I think if you can think that the role of education is not, let's say, private schools making money, generating surplus, even though they're all non-profit corporations, but the role of education is to transform human life. Now it becomes a social purpose or a mission-driven, like an NGO approach. To me, that's very important, not just in public schools, but also in higher education. Okay, I don't
Yeah.
answer they're looking for.
Sure, Professor Sheth, thank you so much. And I think we have a lot of questions, but I am just mentioning because we have limited time, so we won't be able to address all of them, but please feel free to write to us and we'll be happy to address all your queries and questions. All your insights are well taken. I think we have taken a note of all that. We will save it and try to reach out to you in the best possible way we can. Going back to the question, that part you mentioned about the internal stakeholders and the stakeholder inclusivity part of it. I think it's very important. Since the beginning of this launch, we have been discussing that branding and purpose-driven branding is not only about the internal stakeholders, but also about the external stakeholders. It's about the employees who are part of it. I think David mentioned that as well. And then how those advocacies can be created with the customers, employees, suppliers, everybody who is part of that business. An excellent example that comes to my mind from India is about Mahindras, about Tata's, Reliance. I think all of them, they have this ingredient quality which they develop in their business model itself, which talks about the integrity, which talks about the business ethics, which is ingrained in all the stakeholders in terms of their policies, ethics with which they work, they relate, they develop their relationship, everything. And in fact, when we talk about the AI-driven world also, it has to have those type of inclusivity where the voices are being heard. And because we are in co-created world in the digital aspect, every time we have to be dynamic and agile enough to adapt those policies and provide equal avenues to every stakeholder in the business. That's how the inclusivity works. It's not only about one particular stakeholder. So, Professor David, if you can talk about the customers.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I wanted to say that Jeg, as usual, is got some great insight. But the reality is that most customers say that they will want to have an association with products and companies that do social good. But in most cases, very few of their purchases are actually affected, even though they say they will, but in the end of the day, they don't change it. But a couple of things. One is that even if 5 or 10 or 15% of your customers are influenced, that's a difference between doing okay and thriving. So it can make a big difference. And the second thing is that if I could pick up one word to sort of mention what we're aspirationally after, it's inspiration. You want a social effort that's inspiring. And you don't get that with grants. You don't get that with volunteering. You don't get that with energy goals. And you don't get that with ESG reports on percent of minorities on the board. But you can get it with a signature branded program. And so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for programs that will really have an emotional connection, and it will really have credibility and will inspire. It will be, he says, wow, you got to hear about this. Wow, you got to see what these guys are doing. And that's what we see with this Lifebuoy Help a Child Reach 5. And that's what we see with Habitat, with Humanity. It's inspiring, and it has inspiring stories. So if there's one word to close with, it would be, let's inspire.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Aker, Professor Jain, and Professor Sheth. Now, can I request Professor Jain to give away short closing remarks for the same?
Sure. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to conclude with only 3 points that I have to talk about the whole idea of purpose-driven branding. So the one part is we have been discussing about that every businesses need to have inclusivity and we need to work on it. Now, the point is that how to do that. I think David mentioned about that point, and I wanted to reiterate that, which is about the brand communities, which is where you involve all the stakeholders, where you have the inclusivity with the mission, vision, and you develop signature programs. And I would give the example of HOG, which is Harley Group. I think they have commendable work which they have been doing in terms of building the communities, because they take hold, they connect with the brand so well, and they are always passionate about what we are saying. That's what I think he mentioned about inspiring people and developing those stories around it. And the second point is about how do you develop all these programs while understanding the societal need. Now I'm reiterating that again, because societal need across the market, including India, is very different. Cultural norms are different, socio-cultural parameters are different. If I give you something beyond India like China, where there is a concept of leftover women, that's very different from the cultures than India. So I think Asian markets itself is so different. We need to understand and spot those issues and how brands can help them. And there are a lot of personal care category brands which have actually helped those issues of leftover women's in the Chinese market. So I think that was something which I just wanted to mention. And the third and the last point which I wanted to mention is, why are we discussing all of that? Why are we discussing purpose-driven branding? We're discussing purpose-driven branding, and I would mention late Professor Don Schultz here, because 10 years ago, he told me, Varsha, the entire brand differentiation is going down. All the product categories, services that we are talking about doesn't have differentiation. Look at the products around us. If it is a mere shampoo or it is a body wash, anything that we use on regular basis, there is hardly any difference. So what is the difference? Difference is all about how do you make a mark in the individual's life? How do you understand that individual customer life and make their life more beneficial, more easier, more seamless? That is what the branding is all about. It's all about hearing them out, understanding their pain points. I think that is what Zivame has done in India, where they understood the pain points of lingerie sector in the women category and developed beautiful stories to educate women about their own products, where there was a taboo about it and people were reluctant to discuss about their own products. So I think the whole idea with which we are discussing is make a brand differentiation, but also have that differentiation with the products, with the societal understanding, with the needs and requirement of the markets, so that you can actually have win-win situation for all the collaborations that the stakeholders would be having with the business community. So that would be my closing remark for the book.
Thank you so much, Professor Jain, for your insightful remarks. Yes, would you like to say something?
What?
Would you like to add something?
Oh no, but I just want to again thank Jag for coming and Varsha for making this book relevant to India, and thanks to Wiley for putting on this launch party.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Wiley Group, for being with us and helping us in making this possible. Could see the entire team here. Thank you. And
Thank you. So
thank you, Professor Shant.
it's always a joy to be with Varsha and David. So
It's a
it's always-
joy to hear you out and learn so much from all of you.
I'm glad that I was able to do it, which is great. So thank you, guys. See you later. Bye-bye.
Okay, see you, Jag.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. A great clap for everyone. All the great props.
Thank you.